All right, thank you all for coming out. This session is called Understanding Software Logistics, the Rise of the Platform Engineer. We'll go ahead and do some quick introductions right here. So Jason, you want to start?
You're already talking.
What?
Okay, never mind, I'll go. So hey everyone, I'm Jason Valentino. I work at the Bank of New York. I'm the head of their developer practice. I run all their DevOps teams, also some weird compliance stuff. We've got about, 400 enablers that work with the rest of the engineering community to help them get about their day-to-day and to make things as seamless as possible when they're trying to develop software.
Great. My name's Lee Faust. I'm Global Field CTO at GitLab. I've been with GitLab for about 3.5 years, and I have the distinct opportunity as I travel around to meet great people like Jason and understand what are some of their challenges, where are they trying to go, what do their roadmaps look like. Anytime I'm out talking to customers and executives, one of the biggest things anytime we start talking about platforms and building out platforms, it's not something that we take on for a weekend activity. It's not a hobby. These are roadmap items. These are things that end up taking years to adopt, years to build, and so hopefully we can impart some wisdom here today on experiences that we've had and be able to have an opportunity to be able to share those experiences with you all. So the first thing, to be able to just level set and know how we look at GitLab, how we look at platform engineering. A lot of the things here are around developer productivity, security compliance, collaboration standardization, automation, and reducing onboarding times. As you look across whether what we call DIY DevOps, you've got a number of different tools that you're sort of stitching together. You've got different personas along the way. The platform engineers are the ones who are doing that stitching of all of the work and then looking for some of those different similarities or how we can build components across those. Jason, how does that map up to the work that you're doing at BNY?
It depends. To me, platform engineering, and my favorite definition of it is probably from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's white paper on it, right? Is the idea of reducing duplication throughout the organization by centralizing services that are needed by everybody. Now, that can be good or bad. If you're good at it, it's a fantastic enabler for the organization. If you're bad at it, you probably just created a couple more toll gates for your organization that probably are hated by the rest of the engineering organization. And so for us, it's like a really big tenet of mine to only own things that are, the most critical, most reused components of the organization. Frameworks used by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teams across the org, tools that everyone must use, and then really taking that very seriously. So if anyone in the room is the team that owns your company's, source code repository and the build tools for it, there's a tax for using those tools every time someone goes to log in, goes to try to navigate them, finds a build that's flaky and doesn't have the observability tools to tell what's wrong with it, puts a ticket in, your team responds 2 days later, right? And so for me, it's kind of the number one principle I tell my platform team is that I'm going to value you, and I'm going to rank you, and I'm going to pay you based on what the rest of the world has to say about our service as an organization. Like at the end of the day, it is a great responsibility to own those capabilities for the rest of the org. And you should be making the org better and noticeably by the engineers that should be ranking you. Little tangent, but.
No, I love that. As you're talking about reuse, one of the items that when I was learning to code and I ended up working on some operations teams, one of the things that I know a lot of companies struggle with is the not invented here attitude. So how do you blend that mix between how do you sort of tell people, oh, by the way, reuse components are over here, here's our templates, versus somebody going ahead and saying, you know what, I could just build a better one if I just started by myself.
But if they did, then good. The problem is the tax that comes with it. And so, we used to, before BNY, I worked at Peloton, those bikes that don't go really far if you get on them. We had a really complex backstage implementation. We got to the point where we had key templates, and, it came down to the point where if I'm a developer that company was a little less regulated, so I gave a lot more choice. I could choose coding language. I could choose what I wanted to do. I could choose how I wanted to build. However, if I built the golden microservice, every single thing I needed from start to finish, from even just creating a service registry entry all the way from my Git repository being set up, a templated build being set up, all the way to a deployment, all the way in non-prod with reservations in prod was 15 minutes.
Right.
So you could take the 15-minute route. You could take the possible month route. It was your choice, and we did it a lot more through Carrot. It'd be why I take a little bit more I have to make sure everyone's building certain aspects of software the same way. There's this government that cares about stuff like that. And so we don't have as much freedom, I still approach it the same way. I'm like, hey, if you have to build this on your own, here's the things that need to be true in order for me to approve it going forward. And obviously, if my team is doing their job and there's an easy, to use the golden path analogy,
yep,
they're gonna take it, or most people will take it. And then the ones that aren't taking it, I probably should have an interview with them and find out why.
Great. So, how many people here in the audience? I really can't see really well, so I'm this.
We could a second ago, and now we can't.
How many people have read the Phoenix Project? Right? Had a few hands go up. If you haven't read it, you absolutely should go on this place called Amazon and probably order it. It's a really good book.
You get like $15 every time you support Amazon at this conference. So
hold on, let me get my little what is it? My link, my affiliate link.
Yes.
And, everybody can go to that link to go.
Brought to you by Carl's Jr.
It's a really good book talking about the analogies between the operations side and the development side of software development, and this mentor who takes on this new manager under their wing and relates it to the manufacturing process. And back in the early 90s, I had the opportunity to meet a gentleman at Rational Software. His name was Jack Greenfield. And he was sort of the first person to start talking about software factories. And everybody was up in arms. Oh, you want to build robots, and everybody's going to take your coding job. And he was like, no, that's not what we're trying to do. He was like, if you are exactly what you were talking about, Jason, when you start talking about what are the number of templates, what are the approved languages, what are the things that we want to be able to do from a reuse standpoint, when we're able to block those things out, we can move a lot faster. And so one of the things that we're going to try to take throughout the rest of the session is, what does it look like going beyond the Phoenix projects? I know that there's some additional books that have gone beyond this, but there's some more analogies, especially as we start to go to the hyperscalers and we start talking about what it looks like to deploy there, what that looks like. Do you have any, I know you and I had a chat before this when you read the Phoenix Project, was there anything that stood out to you like, this is really powerful?
I was, at the time it came out, I was a guy who used to work for the data center that got elected, that got thrown into an innovation lab. And so it was a good, it was a good description of what people on the software side thought of my kin. And had me deeply think about some of the processes and toll gates that we inserted along the way for the convenience of our own processes, but not to the convenience of the person that's trying to get work done. And the weird part about, the thing to me that I always keep bringing up with the Phoenix Project is, if you read the book, there's this giant, if you think about it, old school organization, silo of the Linux people here, silo of the Wintel people here, silo of the people that can get something on top of them over here and try to develop software over there. And the executive structure is set up like this to make it as difficult as possible to navigate that. Whenever we talk about platform engineering, if you're like me and you're a naturally grumpy person, it's very easy to go grumpy and be like, we're just centralizing shit again. Wait, I'm sorry, that's... We did one good call out to Amazon, and Jason drops one swear so far, so we're even. But it's really easy to say, oh, we're just going back to a world, but we're not. Platform engineering is about building services. It's about building things that are instant access. It's kind of like second $15, like AWS. Hey, everything should be as easy as humanly possible to consume, build, and run. It's not about taking all the people that have the knowledge and putting them together. It's about having those people build something that the average two-person pizza team can just immediately consume and run with.
Yeah, I can almost see you being that person in the book where you were the one who was always the one in the corner that was responsible for like everything, but really didn't have any power to actually impact the change and never got a vacation, never got.
Oh,
Was
man.
that you?
I hate vacations, absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that's really interesting to me is I've used this slide for probably about 12 years. Now, I've added some new things to it over the years, but what amazes me is how much of this still rings true, just sort of from an architecture perspective. And I take Jack Greenfield's software factory analogy. So for me, this is a software development lifecycle. So going from raw goods to package. And then you've got software logistics. And one of the things that we did is, like, when I started being a developer, we would have like one package. Like, I had to go build a WAR, and then somebody took that WAR, and there was a release manager that figured out a time window and said, oh, I'm just going to deploy this to my WebSphere server or to my Tomcat instance. And none of the other stuff we worried about. Now, with the proliferation of services across hyperscalers and all this other work, now we've got to worry about provisioning scripts and configuration scripts and securing those and IBOMs. And then once we are able to target those, we have to deploy. And then once we deploy, we got to observe. And then what happens when there's an issue, things like that. And then overall, that ends up leading to the software supply chain from end to end. So when you hear people talking about securing the software supply chain, it's not about me creating attestations in a CI file. It's about being able to have traceability of who did what and why, and then being able to track that change all the way into production. And then on the left-hand side, we've got productivity metrics, and on the right-hand side, we have efficiency. Now, when you and I started going down the path of talking about this, I was trying to ask you, like, where are the holes in this? Because I'd love to learn. And when you look at doing this, are there boxes that you think are missing? Are there boxes that you think should be that we should remove? How do you see it?
It's a great slide. I can see why I've been using it so long, and I like it on the purple background. But I think there is no problem if it's one single high-performing team we're talking about. Any one single high-performing team of developers will do all of this, and they'll be fine. It's when someone comes back and says, can you tell me that the other 200 teams did it the exact same way? And that's when I start wrestling with this whole weird controls hat that I have nowadays. And that's where, if there was ever an opportunity for this to take strength, it's the how do I follow the bit from idea to creation to validation to deployment, and know that it's, that this whole thing has been secured from soup to nuts. And that's where I don't think there's any perfect answer to that. There's no product where you just flip the switch and it works all the way through. Like, I spend a lot of my internal development time making sure that, our peer reviews happening consistently throughout the organization. If teams are having really long queues in that, how do I help them, right? Like, there's just a lot of observability from the top of the house you need in order to make sure that all these little factories across your organization are running. They're not tripping through the process. They're not finding problems with it where they're begrudgingly just doing it anyway or circumventing it or trying to find their own little internal way of hacking it, right? Making this as easy as possible in a templated fashion.
One of the things that you said there I think is so critical. I'm going to throw the GitLab sales team under the bus. I don't know if any of them are here.
What?
So a lot of times when we go and we're talking to customers, they think when customers are using GitLab that there's an application. And they think of them like Netflix. Oh, so they only need to worry about building one thing. And when you're building,
you can solve any problem one time.
So you could build a great architecture for it, and you can release many times a day. You've got all these great things. But at BNY, you have a portfolio of Netflixes. And some of them have been around for probably 20, 30 years.
I found a VB6 app yesterday.
Oh, my goodness. So as you're going through that portfolio, how do you start to think about, one of the big things I'm sure a lot of people hear because they came to reInvent, there's a lot of topics this week about app modernization, talking about app migrations, talking about going through and how do I turn applications down and sort of end of life them. What are some of the guidelines that you use as you're thinking about, because you were talking about all these different portfolio items that you've got to manage?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my job to run around and, with the exception of security, which we take very seriously at the bank, it's not my idea to be like, hey, I don't like the pattern you used a couple of years back, update this, or hey, I don't think this is the right framework nowadays. My job is to make sure if you're building new, there's clear direction on what new looks like and where we prefer it. And then it's also my job to say, hey, when you're building, regardless if it's new, old, middle of the ground, here's the things that need to be true. And a lot of times it's, when you guys think of your pipelines, I don't have a team that goes around and build pipelines for 1,200 custom apps, right? Like that doesn't seem like a really great goal for me. So what do I do instead is I give the teams, I say, hey, you will own build engineering. We will provide templates. And one thing, because I want your builds to be mutable, here are the things it needs to call out to for me to make sure that you're responsibly building software. Here's how I guarantee every app is being security scanned, on build. Here's how I ensure that quality engineering tests are being deposited into a centralized repository and that scores are at an acceptable level. Here's how I ensure your Sonar scores or code composition tool of choice are coming through at an acceptable level, and I raise them up. And then at the same time, I do a lot with those, and we'll talk about metrics later, but those quantifiable, like here's the heat map of my organization. But I've also found the best way to find out if a team's healthy or a developer's doing well is ask them. So we also come back and hit them with a little bit of the human touch, which is I can see your build times. I don't know if it's good or bad in your opinion. Yeah. Tell me.
So along those lines, you and I had this really good dialogue that platform engineers today have really been focused, they've sort of evolved out of the DevOps teams. And the DevOps teams 10 years ago were really focused on automation around the build pipelines, building reusable components, having templates.
We were just getting introduced to,
Yes.
CI/CD back then, right?
So as you start to think about the relationship between, like when we think about the Phoenix project and we talk about these raw goods and the factory floor, one of the things that I've always found very interesting is for anybody here in the room that's trying to learn from a BNY and trying to figure out what are I like how you talk about observability. How do you think about the automation aspects? Like, are your targets 20% automation, 80% automation, 100% automation? How does that differ across, like, what do I do for a mainframe application versus what do I do for a cloud-native
I'm working on
Kubernetes?
that. I'm working on that.
How do you sort of break those things up?
It's tough because the portfolio is so much more dispersed than I'm used to with my previous lives. To me, it's one of those where I measure tool adoption across the firm. I clearly measure the mandatory tool adoption because it's not a great list to not be on that. But then there's the whole preferred tool adoption. And if you're using those tools, and then I can, with things like, we'll stick to, I'm a GitLab customer. I get $15 for that. But like if you're, serious.
I know.
Okay, yeah. So, everyone's going to be in GitLab. That's not a problem. And then I can start measuring where your template started from. And I can measure the amount of those templates that are calling out to new APIs that I have embedded in the templates to do a bunch of health checks throughout the world. And so we're actually seeing the majority of the company is, 100% of the company is what I call compliant with the have to do's.
Yep.
I don't like being the person that tells people they have to do stuff. This kind of breaks my heart as part of my role. But we see a high percentage of them that are in the probably should do category. And I have a really good feeling. And I feel like you really have to, if you're sitting in a seat where you do have this power where you get to dictate how people build software, you need to take that really lightly. You need to be very slim with your must-dos. You got to be careful to not use too many words like, this is regulatory, because they lose their meaning over time. Like, here's the must, here's the should. I show the shoulds to the CIOs. I explain the benefit of them, and then I measure the shoulds against the don'ts. And I see across the organization how much faster these teams move. That encourages the others to come along for the ride.
So I did a roundtable on Tuesday, and one of the big takeaways that I learned from the other participants in the roundtable is that there is an evolution happening now that you've got to treat your platform as a product. It's not an outcome. And so I love what you were just describing there is that's what a product person would do. Okay, well, what things do I put in the backlog versus what things do I schedule as the next iteration of things to do? And then being able, just like any other good product person would do, is where are the commonalities so I can go build things once and have it dispersed across maybe not all 1,200, maybe it might go to 800, but I'm going to get something out of that by making that change. Are you looking at having an official product person, or do you have an official product person sort of running that platform engineering role?
I got a whole group.
Really?
And here's the thing. I'm only a year and a half into this role, and so if anyone's joining a new company and you're in a role similar to mine, let me tell you how to scare the hell out of your team. Tell them your performance appraisals will be based off the NPS score of their internal products. We didn't do that year one. But that's like every single tool we have in the company now has an NPS score assigned with it.
Okay.
We measure the latency of onboarding and ease of use and survey scores that are coming on all of them. On top of that, we do then look at we were talking about earlier with how well people are using it.
Yep.
I think adoption can sometimes be a little bit of a vanity metric, and so it's one that I like to approach carefully. But when I have optional tools that are, the target population could be the entire company that I'm not seeing like them breaking a 50% threshold, really makes me double tap on whether we've built a good offering or not, right?
Great. So as we talk about these platform engineers who have moved out of this DevOps role, they've really been focused on the automation on the build side, getting us to a package. Now they're being forced into a world of now they've got to provision all the cloud resources, and
It's fun.
So yeah, clicking through the cloud console and trying to search and figure out where you got to set up your policies. I love that. That's a great part of the UI. So one of the things that we have seen over time is, and I've got to probably adjust my metric because I heard some differing numbers, but we're starting to elevate the role of a platform engineer, and we're starting to figure out what are good metrics, like how many developers should I have to how many platform engineers? And then at the same time, how do I get away from having those platform engineers do things manually and get them to a point that they're doing them in an automated fashion? How do you look at that from how you do? So number one to that is, what does that ratio look like for you? Do you think it's too low right now? Do you think it's just right? And then how are you looking at being able to automate some of those?
As someone who's in budget season, I'm going to go ahead and say the ratio is way too low where I work. And I don't think there is a right number, because platform engineering at every company is slightly different. Sometimes it includes infrastructure as service. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's strictly related around the SDLC. Sometimes it includes SDLC and frameworks. Sometimes SDLC and frameworks, then the API gateway. Yeah. So it's tough. But I think when it's done right, the core components of what it should build all are scoring high. Okay. Right? I feel that when you can actually see where that previous operations work is happening. Right. Right? Like, in my career, I've worked at companies where we threw everything at the development teams. And so if you didn't know how to use the cloud that's being provided to you, or the tools that were being given to you as the cloud, you're going to hire for it. You're going to make sure that for every couple developers, there's an SRE that can watch their backs, and that can own the latter end of building out, doing the build mechanics, the deployment mechanics, working with whether you have to self-support your own Kubernetes infrastructure or send it to someone else's, whether you're using AWS raw, whether you're actually writing your own Terraform or not. I've worked at companies where there's a good middle ground, sure, where there's a good central function that has this expertise that you can queue to get access to them, but they still encourage you to build your own. And I'm trying to live in a world where everything is so easy that, yes, I want you to have SRE representation. I don't want it to be everybody in your pod, but I want every pod to have local access, and I want to build tools that are so easy The SRE community is not arguing over just the basic functionality of deploying something. When they put their heads down on something really complicated, it is a much more complicated problem to solve.
Yeah, I love that. And that leads into the next slide as we start to think about measurements and how the big thing around Gen AI is, I'm boosting my developer productivity, but at the same time, am I losing efficiencies on the other side where now I've not got 100% code coverage, but I don't have the test to be able to manage all of the code that's been generated. How do you look at being able to balance that between both worlds? So the people on the development side and the people on the platform engineering side. How do you balance that act?
Specific to the AI comment?
Not just to AI, just to how do you manage things around when you want to think about, like you were talking about the NPS scores and the tooling that's supporting the developers. And so when you're measuring that, how do you balance that? Like, do you want a 50-50? Do you just want to make everybody succeeding? How do you measure that?
I mean, everyone's got to be good. But for me, it's when I look at my developer community, and this is from Jason's lens. And Jason's lens is one that, yes, maybe informs our most senior executives, like ideas and what they want to fund and what we need to move forward on. When I look at the development community, I look at the sheer velocity they're able to move at. I look at the amount of quality that they're having in their product. We have another slide. It's going to be DORA. You get it. But I like holding them to the standard unit of measurement of just and not necessarily against benchmark, but self-improvement, right? Like I like thinking of developer metrics, most of them, as a stock ticker, right? If Lee's at 20 and Jason's at 50, is Jason 30 better than Lee? Probably not. Lee was at 10 last year and Jason was at 60. So Jason's clearly on the way down, Lee's on the way up. And so for me, I like looking at trend lines in teams and just seeing the progress they're making. And I like seeing, maybe I did roll out like an AI tool to 5,000 people, right? I watch adoption and I watch what weird things happen in all the ecosystem of their metrics, as I roll those things out. And then it helps me comment, steer, direct, and go on it. Versus on the platform side of the house, I really look more about the health of the platform, the lovability of the platform, and the ease of use of the platform.
Do you find it that when you have that lovable platform, like a lot of questions I get from executives is, we have low adoption rates. Do you find that when you're is there like a happy point in the NPS scores that makes it easier for people to want to join that platform? How do you get that adoption number up?
We got to build something good, which sucks because that's hard. But beyond that, when you do see something that has an NPS score that you may not be proud of, right? To me, and this is a big thing we need to start doing if we care about developer experiences, we got to find out why. And not only do we, as leaders, and I have a team, a DevOps product team, not only do they have to go out and actually talk to devs and do some experience sampling and figure out what is making that score low, we need to create a culture where the average person building that product with the low NPS score knows how to listen. And that's not an easy trick for some of us old dogs.
Yeah.
Because I come from a world where I'm right. And if you just use my product the way I mean you to use it, it'll have the desired outcome. Versus a world where there's several thousand engineers trying to navigate something, they're scoring it low.
Yeah.
Please work with them to find out why and move whatever their feedback is to the top of your backlog stack.
Right. So we're going to go and sort of shift away from the whys and sort of go to some of the hows. And the one thing that you did allude to is when you talked about NPS scores, but there's other ways to be able to metric how people are doing on the platform side. The easy one here when we're talking about DORA metrics is, you know what, I'm doing GitOps and I'm going to my Kubernetes environment and I can see a lot of that where I'm using a small number of tools. And you've talked about these 1,200 different applications and they all have probably different tool chains. They probably have different deployment targets. And how do you look to be able to map DORA to all different applications so you can make your platform lovable.
Yeah, it's tough. And something about developer metrics in general, you all probably figured out, they mean different things to different people, and there's always a different persona reading them, right? And so for me, I like the basic DORA at the top of house. It gives, my most senior leader the opportunity to say, here's how many times my organization releases software. Year over year, that number is increasing. That's good. Or year over year, this number is decreasing, and Jason Valentino needs to take a hike. And so I think, deployment frequency, mean time to recover, change failure, all big ticket items. The lead time one is an interesting one, because the aggregate of everything in your organization will teach you that you're getting slowly better or slowly worse, but that only happens if you go find the areas where it is probably the most egregious and have that part of the organization copy the places where it's probably the best. And what I mean by, and for lead time for change, let's just assume our definition of it, because if you talk to any of the DORA researchers, they're like, whatever you think is the right answer is the right answer. But say that's from the first commit you make in a new version to the time that thing is live in production, right? There's a lot of different things that could come into the way of that team being able to make that, a single digit day number. You may not want it to be a single digit day number for one, and that's cool. That number doesn't have to be against industry benchmark. It needs to be against what you want it to be. But as you start to look at it and you're like, what are these days here? And you come to find out you got a weird change control process. It needs to be submitted on a Thursday in order to get something out on the next Tuesday, right? You start to unpack those little things that you can have an impact if you slowly start to take away from the organization or optimize for the organization.
Yeah, I was actually talking to an executive this morning, and it was very interesting. I like how you talk about measuring individuals, and he was telling me that it's not the individual that he's concerned about. And he goes, that's not even the team or the project. He's like, for me, it's how is the company doing as a whole? Because I have hiring, I've got people that I might need to let go, who aren't meeting our standards. I've got all of these other things that I need to manage, and without data, I can't really make a lot of those decisions. And we had talked about the difference between metrics and analytics and being proactive versus reactive. How do you look at that around how you're using that day to day?
It depends, because I'm the worst. I've got a dashboard with hundreds and hundreds of metrics on it. And when I find one that annoys me, I'm the first one to be like, look at this. It takes this many days for a new starter to get to their first commit. Oh my God. And so the good news is when you have all that data, I feel like it's a literal part of mine and my product team's job to digest it, use that, and along with what's going to come up on the next slide, help inform a roadmap for not only what we do from a platform engineering perspective, which is the easy part.
Yep.
Things you need my team to do, easy. I move it to the top of the backlog. Things we need the entire organization to uplift on is the difficult part, and these help inform both.
Great. So we'll go to the next slide. This was when you and I started having a conversation about doing this session. This was something you were very passionate about, was productivity, measuring productivity for developers. And anybody here who has not gone out and researched the SPACE framework, I was a VP of engineering for a company back about 20 years ago, and my CTO came to me and was like, let's measure lines of code. And I'm like, I'm just going to let you know, you're going to get a lot of lines of code. And then the next thing was, let's measure bugs in production. And I'm like, okay, well, that means we're going to slow the process down because people are going to be overly cautious about what they're building. And then it was like, okay, well, let's...
Then we're going to categorize the JIRA tickets different. It's going to be great.
So what are, not just at BNY, but over your career, you had some really good examples over how you've sort of evolved your thinking around space and how you try to leverage the data that comes out of it.
I do. And Fancha Setacharam, who used to work with me in Peloton, who's now at AWS. We're up to $45.
Yeah.
She's the one that brought it into our old organization. But when we talked about lead time to production, I gave you an example that maybe, hey, there's something in a change control process. Maybe, hey, there's something here. Maybe provisioning this particular resource takes a little bit longer at your organization because, I don't know, the automation in front of it's bad or it's people-driven. I don't know. Space originally was intended as a survey framework to go out across your greater organization and find out where the rumblings are coming from the engineering community, where they're feeling like they're overly process-laden, where they feel like there's just technology that isn't working well for them, how easy it is to communicate, how easy is it to find an answer to a problem, right? This API doesn't work, documentation sucks, how do I get in touch with this team? Don't know, right? Sometimes it's in Confluence, sometimes it's in Stack, don't know. And so it does a really good job at that on its own. But then you have to put a little bit of, and so this is just Jason and my survey philosophy and asking questions of people. Number one, it's, if you want to know what's going on in your environment, just please tell people it'll always be in the conversation more than it'll be in the hard and fast quantitative metrics. And the second is, also don't feel, like, just like I said, in my particular world, I put my own products on blast. I want to know what you think about my implementation of the GitLab. I want to know what you think of my implementation of Artifactory. I want to know how easy it is to onboard to them, right? Not, do you like these tools? No, nope. How do you like how we did it? I also put our processes on blast. I want to know if there's a certain architectural review that you have to go through to get a project over X million dollars approved, that process is being scored. Because at most companies, and this is I think banks, we love our processes, but it exists everywhere. When someone builds a process to solve something, they tend to build it for their own convenience and the convenience of what their goal, which isn't the builder, ever, ever. And so what I like to do is, this is my revenge on the process owners of my company and the legacy, things that even I own, to find out what the community thinks and what the community thinks needs to be fixed in order for them to move as fast as humanly possible. Because my one revelation in all my years of operations and software engineering is, the average engineer wants to go fast. They want to build good stuff. We get in the way. We're the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I know when myself as a developer, you take a lot of pride in what you build. And one of the things that over my career, the one thing that I always found very interesting was the metric around developer happiness.
Oh, yeah.
And when you think about developer happiness, people are like, well, what makes a developer happy? Right? And you just said, they want to be able to go fast. They want to be listened to. They want to be able to have somebody who is trying to remove those barrier of entry. But the other thing is some of those things are kind of hard to measure. The one thing that I found out from an HR person is they told me, they said, it's very easy for me to measure developer happiness. She goes, what's my turnover rate? Mm-hmm. So if you've got a team that almost completely turns over, it shouldn't be, oh, we have a turnover rate. It's what is the stack that they're using? What is their manager doing to remove the barriers for them?
It's not always because of the dental policy.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So are there any specific things in space where, do you think it goes far enough? Are there things that you would tweak out of it?
And Abhinoda is a buddy of mine, and he's, I follow his podcasts and stuff, but one of the early conversations we had when Tantra was building this, and we were consulting with him, was the part where I want to know my own processes. I don't want to know, are you burdened by process? I want to put certain things in my organization on blast. And space on its own doesn't necessarily, if you take the normal sample template, doesn't lead to that, as much as if there was any customization I'd put on top of this thing that I very highly advocate for, is don't feel free to ask the clarifying questions. You may know you already have bad processes. Call the 5 big ones out.
Great. So one of the other metrics that we're hearing, it's getting a lot of visibility, especially you talk about compliance, regulatory needs, and the US government has made it.
Never heard of them.
So they have now said that software bill of materials is now going to become a requirement if you are a federal agency or if you work with a federal agency.
Is it also part of NIST too?
Yep, it's part of NIST too. So
as you guys can see, I'm really enthusiastic about the controls part of my job.
So as we are thinking about wanting to be removing these impediments and developers wanting to move fast, how do you handle that with the security team? Because they sort of always get they get a free reverse Uno card that says, I'm going to go into production. Nope. You are the one who cannot go into production.
I very much give them that Uno card, but we built it in line to all the build processes. Yep. And so, as an example of this might be just source code vulnerability or static vulnerabilities, right? Your static code scan is at our company helps score whether you get an approved RFC or not. And if you have something really evil in there, it's don't pass go. Now it's my job to make sure as early in the process as possible, those folks know those things and that they're getting alerts and they're getting notifies. And how hard it is to just upgrade the framework here, right? Make sure we're helping them, we're bringing them to water and teaching them how the water works versus just taking them there and stopping. And so for me, I think this is twofold. I think getting controls into the build process without going to the world where you're saying, hey, use this template, never manipulate this template. I want people to really play with their builds. I want them to be able to call that. I want them to have freedom. If your team has created a standard and you want to put a build breaker in it, if people aren't following that standard, that's great. Don't ask me to build break whatever the number I quoted earlier, number of applications in the organization. I'm going to be dumb at it. But at the same time, there's going to be a few little pop-outs to your build process that need to be true. And then the part that I think is the gold here is having that ultimate end-to-end traceability that not only did all of those things happen, but here was the version we chose when this first ticket went out. And that thing is embedded on the actual artifact that's going into production, right? And tied to the infrastructure that's hosting it.
Wonderful. So I got in a lot of trouble when we were putting this slide together because Jason, being a customer of GitLab's, obviously the GitLab marketing team was like, where are all the GitLab slides? So we do have to end on...
I get a discount for doing this.
So we do have to finish up with one GitLab slide. So, tell us a little bit. We've given a lot of food for thought through this session. How are you looking to leverage GitLab to help make some of those things possible inside the organization?
You do already, right? So I honestly think when it comes to SCM, they're all good, right? You are competing in a space where your competitors are great at what you do, you're great at what you do. I think you guys do a great job of not only being API first, but API only. And so for a team that actually has a group of engineers on the background that can actually, like I say, I'm building things into every build process. I'm also administering all of these projects from a central governance robot. I couldn't do that if you guys didn't really put a lot of attention and detail into how you've structured your API architecture. I really like GitLab's roadmap around looking at AI, not just from because I'm a pretty shitty developer, and so AI coding assistants, man, they're the best. But I think it's not enough. It's not enough to give someone an AI coding assistant and say, hey, go work faster, and hit them with a stick. I think we're going to start to see AI break out of the IDE and start becoming a lot more agent-based, start playing a bigger role in the overall SDLC. Per this slide, I think that is part of the GitLab roadmap, which makes me happy that to have you guys as a partner.
Yeah, since we're talking a little bit about roadmap, when you think about GitLab being that single platform, when we talk about data and metrics and being able to pull a good portion of that data out. Also, we talked a little bit about context switching and not needing to have to jump across multiple tools. I know when we talked things like SonarQube, I'm happy that you're using SonarQube. It's what makes your platform lovable. The data, though, is also readily available to the engineers in GitLab as part of the merge request process, so they don't need to have to go over and log into SonarQube and be able to say, okay, well, now let me go find what is the right log file, and let me go figure out where my artifact is or what my security renderings are. And with all of that data coming back into GitLab, the pieces that we're now starting to do is we're starting to vectorize our databases. So we're vectorizing the Elastic side, so search becomes a lot more inference-based rather than text-based. And the Postgres database, where we're taking things around SHAs and understanding the chain of a commit. Well, now what we can do is we can start to do things with Duo to start to say, okay, we can make recommendations on who should be a proper reviewer based on the changes that are being made. So if anybody here, as we're coming up to the end of our session here, if anybody's here interested in learning more about what we're doing, where we're going, we had a big announcement this week around us using Duo with Q. Please don't hesitate to stop by our booth. I'm sure the people would love on a Thursday afternoon to get a big group of people to all of a sudden show up. But with that, I want to thank Jason for being such a great co-host here. And what we will do is, if we can bring the lights down and see if anybody has any questions.